Hey everyone, welcome back to economics. Today what our focus is going to be is upon continuing with our big ideas of economics, and in particular our focus upon markets. Now remember, when we talk about markets, a market itself is simply any place that buyers and sellers come together. We could talk about the farmer's market, a specific spot where farmers know that they can go to sell their goods and buyers know that they can go buy them. Stock markets work just the same. It's simply a place where people who want to sell their stock can contact someone who wants to buy their stock and really efficiently make all of that happen. Now, when we talk about markets or market economies, the big idea are going to be two main principles here. Right? One of those we looked at yesterday, the law of demand. The other is going to be what our focus is for today, the law of supply. And by the end of today, when we can put those two things together and understand how many of the different shifts in supply or the shifts in demand can occur, we can really make a lot of sense out of this topic that we call microeconomics. How the small little decisions, buying power of you and I, how that can really impact big economic focuses. Now, what we looked at yesterday was this idea of demand. And one of the big principles was, what's the difference between a change in quantity demand versus a change in demand itself? Right? Well, if I backed up one step and just looked at my questions on the right there, the first one was, what is the law of demand? Now, the law of demand itself simply says that there is an inverse relationship between price and the quantity that somebody will demand. Well, that inverse means opposite. So we know that if the price of something is really high, right? If we're talking about Disney Plus subscriptions here, at $100 per year, there aren't going to be that many people that are willing to pay that. According to our graph, there's almost none that are willing to pay that $100 per year. But as the price goes down, and I slide down my demand line there, the quantity demanded is going to increase. Right? So the law of demand, again, says that there's an inverse relationship, an opposite relationship between price and quantity demand. If the price goes down, the quantity demanded is going to go up. Why? Well, because on my graph here, I can see as those prices increase, I'm going to be moving to the left on that line. And anytime I move to the left on these graphs, remember my numbers get smaller as they move to the left. So a decrease in quantity demand means I'm moving up that same demand line. Right? If I looked at that difference between the change in quantity demand and that change or shift in demand, it's kind of a big one. Remember, mind your P's and your Q's. When we talk about a change in quantity demand, there is only one single thing that will change quantity demand. The one thing that will change your Q, your quantity demand, is going to be your P. So mind your P's and your Q's. If the price, the P, increases, quantity demand is going to go down. If the price decreases, quantity demand is going to go up. But the big point to it is, when we have a change in quantity demand, that change in price just makes me stay on that same line. For a change in demand, or it's probably better called a shift in demand, we're not going to be using this same exact demand line that we have on here. What that means is that something has fundamentally changed, and we now need an actual new demand line to be drawn. It could be, when we look at the factors that change those, it could be there's a change in consumer tastes. Right? So people all of a sudden decide they're really crazy about Disney. They really like the idea of Netflix. They really like the idea of Hulu. Disney just isn't cutting it. Well, if Disney kept their price the same, they continue to charge, say, $60 for a year subscription, there just aren't going to be as many people that want it, and I would need to draw a new demand curve back over here to the left. Remember, whenever your demand or supply that we'll look at today decreases, a decrease is always going to mean that our demand line or our supply line will move back to the left. Okay, so my arrow though shows a decrease because of a change in consumer tastes. We could talk about a change in consumer expectations. If they think that Disney is going to be releasing some brand new crazy cool show, it's like The Mandalorian's new episode, if only there was going to be another one, well, that expectation that that's coming might cause an increase in demand. And again, I would need to draw a new demand line. No matter what price Disney charged, people are going to want more of those. Right? So my demand line with that change in expectation would show an increase. People want more of it. So I draw my line over here to the right. And there were several other factors that could change it too. We mentioned consumer tastes, a change in consumer expectations, but we could also have a change in the number of consumers in the market. If a whole bunch of new people get Rokus or something that they could stream on their TVs, that's going to increase the demand for Disney. We could look at a change in the number of consumers in the market, a change in consumer income. If people all of a sudden had a windfall of money, then the demand is going to increase. A windfall would mean they got a lot. If, on the other hand, people were going on hard times and we had rising unemployment in this nation, that would cause a decrease in demand due to the change in consumer income. The last two were changes in substitute goods and changes in price of substitute goods, or the change in the price of complementary goods. Remember, substitutes means you could trade them out with each other. So if a substitute good goes down in price, the demand for our existing thing, Disney Plus in this instance, if the price of some competitor goes down, demand for Disney Plus is also going to decrease, because some of those people would choose the competitor's product instead. If instead we said that we were looking at a complementary good, something that goes well with it, well, if the price of Roku's decreased, people need something like that to be able to stream on their TV. And so if the price of a Roku goes down, well, Disney Plus is a complementary thing. It goes well with that. So with those decreasing prices of Roku's, Disney would probably expect to see an increase in the demand for their products. Now, I bring up that review because if you understand that, the ideas of supply are really pretty much the same. All we're doing is just flipping those upside down. Okay, so if we're talking about supply and just our simple law of supply, on demand, we'd said there was an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. With supply, it's not going to be inverse. It's not opposite. Instead, we say we have a direct relation. Draw my arrow there next to the words. We have a direct relation between price and quantity supplied. So if the price of something goes up, what that's going to do is send a signal to producers. When the price goes up, producers go, holy cow, we can make a lot more money at this. They're going to want to increase the quantity that they are going to supply. Don't believe me? Well, let's say, for instance, I'm looking for somebody to shovel snow in my driveway. And I come up to you as an entire class, and I say, I'm willing to pay you $1 per hour. Now, at $1 per hour, it's cold outside. You don't want to spend your time out there doing all of that. So there may be some nice person that says, yeah, I'll be willing to go do it for an hour just to help you out because you're getting old, Chapman. But there aren't going to be that many hours of your labor that would be supplied. If, on the other hand, I said I was willing to pay you $20 an hour, well, at that point, there'd probably be a lot of people that would go, look, at $20 an hour, I'd be willing to do that. And what I could show on my supply graph there, my supply curve, better label it, I'd show that my supply curve shows a direct relationship. When the price is low, man, there's just not that many hours of labor that are supplied. But as the price increases, remember going up my axis here, as the price goes up, so too are the quantity of hours that people are willing to supply. Now, if I was starting off offering you a whole lot of money and I decreased my price that I was offering you, so if the price went down, it's going to be the same thing. The quantity that you would be willing to supply would also go down or decrease simply because it's not worth your time to be able to offer as much. So a big point. Prices in a market economy, they act like signals. Prices to a buyer, when a price goes up, that tells buyers, stay away from it. You don't want it. It's not good for you. But when prices go up for suppliers, it sends just the opposite. It tells suppliers, great, we can make more money at this sort of thing, so we should go produce some more stuff. Now, to remember how those work on the graph itself, remember your demand line always trends to go down. So the demand line is downward sloping. A supply line is just the opposite. And so when we look at our supply line, we're going to be like, hey, sup, get it? Because there's an S down here for supply, and it goes up. So I'm being like, cool when I say sup, and everything. The supply line is always going to trend upwards. Now, remember with demand, we talked about this difference between a change in quantity demand and a change in demand. And the only thing that would change the quantity demand was a change in price. Remember, mind your P's and your Q's. The same exact thing is going to be true for supply. So the one thing that will change the quantity supplied here, let me draw my Q and then my S, right? The only thing that will change the quantity supplied is going to be a change in price. But there are going to be some things that could change this entire supply line and make it to where the original one that we have here is just no longer relevant. Okay, so this is going to look very similar to what you were doing with demand, except again, it's going to be kind of flipped upside down. Now, I want to remind you of a really important point. When we were talking about demand, I said it is critical when you're describing what happens to these lines that you do not use the words up or down. Demand does not go up, demand does not go down. We would say, well, the demand line shifts to the right, or the demand line shifts to the left. That's going to be really important when we look at supply stuff here, okay? And I'll show you why that's going to be. Let's say, for instance, we're still talking about shoveling snow, Right? Well, there are several things that could impact your supply of your labor, your supply of hours that you should be willing to shovel there. It could be that we might have a change in the cost of inputs. Sorry about my handwriting there, but a change in the cost of inputs. A cost of inputs would be like the things that are needed to be able to produce this stuff. So if we assumed that you were starting over here on supply line S, well, if the cost of inputs goes up at the current level, right now, you'd be willing to supply just about 2.5 hours of labor for $10. But if the price of shovels increases and gasoline prices go up, so it's more expensive for you to drive to my house to shovel that snow, well, that $10, you're not going to be willing to supply as many of those hours as what you were, simply because it's going to cost you more money, right? So you're not actually getting to keep that $10 due to the increase in the cost of inputs. So think about this. If inputs become more expensive, is that going to mean that your supply would increase or decrease? Well, as the supplier, what's going to happen there is your supply is going to decrease because for that $10, you can't keep as much of it. So what would happen is I'm going to go back to supply line 1, S1. Okay. Now follow me here. Notice how I'm showing a decrease in supply, and I have to say, oh yeah, when we decrease it, it always moves to the left. You do not want to say supply goes up or down, because when you look at the supply chart, it's weird, but a decrease is actually above where the original line was. Why is that? Well, simply because it is upward sloping. And so whenever I move to the left to show a decrease, it actually looks like the line is higher on that graph, but that is a decrease in supply. Moves to the left. Always use the term move to the left for a decrease or move to the right for an increase. The other thing we could see is a change in productivity. You develop some new technique where all of a sudden you can shovel for way more hours and you're no longer going to be as sore as what you previously would have been. So with that change in technique, then we're going to see another change in supply. And what it's going to mean for you is, wow, I could still work for that $10 an hour, but at that same price, I'm now willing to supply more labor. It would signify an increase in supply. And with an increase in supply, which way is your line going to move? Correct. Your line's going to move to the right because a right always shows an increase as numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On that quantity axis, they always get larger as they move to the right. So a change in productivity. You could also see a change in, I'm going to abbreviate here, but a change in technology. Okay, if new technology comes out, some brand new snowblower is invented that makes it to where you can just blow this snow and you can get your snowblower pretty cheaply and everything. Well, with that new technology, your supply is going to, what do you think, increase or decrease? Right? Well, with the new technology, your supply would increase. For the same exact price, $10 an hour, it's easier for you to do it because of that technology. So you would be willing to supply more hours simply because the new technology is available and it's easier for you. So with that change, supply would increase. Which way does your line move? Yeah, your line would move to the right, and our new line then would show up here on S2, according to the graph that we have here. The other thing we could see would be a change in taxes or a change in government subsidies, right? Now, taxes, most of us are familiar with what those are. Subsidies may be a new term. Okay. In the example that I have written down there, I say there's a new self-employment tax that's put in place. So anybody who is self-employed, according to my made-up example here, now has to pay 20% of all of their profits to the city of Athens for this new self-employment tax. Now you're looking at that and going, man, I used to be able to make $10 an hour and keep my $10. Now I got to give 20% of that back to the city for every hour I work. That means your supply, based upon that increase in the tax, your supply is probably going to decrease. Which way would your line move? If you had a decrease in supply, your supply line would move to the left, right? Decreasing numbers through there on the bottom, decreasing quantity numbers. It would be just the opposite if we were talking about government subsidies. A government subsidy, if you subsidize something, you give money to support it, right? So the United States government and the Ohio government, they give subsidies or payments to certain companies that they want to try and be able to help out. So if there was a subsidy, well, you'd be getting $10 per hour, but you would also get help from the government that would then increase your supply. And you would be willing to work more hours or produce more stuff for that same exact price because you're receiving the subsidy from the government. That would mean there would be an increase in demand due to the subsidy, and the line would move over there to the right. We could also look at producer expectations. Again, I'm going to abbreviate here. I've got producer expectations. And so that's going to say that, man, if you're looking at things, you're going, man, I really don't want to wake up and I don't know that I want to go supply my work and be that producer of the labor and stuff today. But if there are not many jobs that are available and you know that it's going to be pretty warm here over the next 3 months, well, with those expectations, you might go, I don't have any other job that I can find, and I don't expect there are going to be a whole lot more snow shoveling jobs coming up. So because of that change in expectations for producers, I should probably go do that job today, right? And you would increase your supply today simply because you don't expect there to be many opportunities down the road in the future. Now, the last one is going to be government regulations. If the government sets a bunch of different rules or regulations on how things have to be done, that too can impact supply. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes there's a place for these regulations, and government should set regulations in some instances. But when they do, it will impact supply. The example that we have here with the snow, you're providing the labor, you're supplying the labor for snow removal. If the government now makes a law that says every single piece of snow that is shoveled needs to be bagged up and put at the curb. So you can't just shovel it off to the side, or you can't just shovel it and throw it in the street. You've now got to put it into a bag and then carry those bags down to the curb. Well, that's an extra hassle for you to do. And so when you're looking at that, you're like, man, with all of these extra regulations and red tape involved, I don't know that I want to supply as much of that labor. It's harder. And so that regulation would decrease your supply. We could look at pollution, right? And don't get me wrong, I think these are good regulations to have. But when a government tells a company you're not allowed to pollute and blow a whole bunch of smoke up into the air, well, companies then have to buy scrubbers and different things to remove the smoke from those smokestacks. And when they do so, that means that those scrubbers cost them money. And for the same price that they were selling something for, say $10, they can't afford to charge that same price. Their supply would decrease and move back over to the left. Now, for your homework questions here, what I'm going to ask you to do is look at a chart that looks really similar to the one that you had yesterday, dealing with the beef consumption and the price of May. Okay, this one is dealing with, I think it's the cost of domestic automobiles. Domestic means those made in the United States. So what I want you to do is look at each one of these, and just like you did yesterday, we're assuming that you start with line A right here, and you're going to say, well, okay, based upon the description of what has changed here, did that actually shift the supply? So for this first one, it says Auto Workers Union agrees to wage cuts. Well, remember, wages are a cost of an input. Businesses have to pay those. So yeah, if the union agrees to take less money for their employees, that would create a shift in supply. Would it be an increase or a decrease? This can be a little tricky, but let's say those cars were selling for $20,000 and they could then make about $140,000 of those at that $20,000 price point. Well, if the workers no longer require as much money for their labor, that's actually going to increase the supply of automobiles. So I'm going to say, yeah, they would increase the supply of automobiles. And remember, anytime there's an increase, your line is going to move to your line is going to move over to the right. Okay, so we have an increase in the supply of automobiles. My line moves over here to the right, and my new curve ends up being line C. See how you can do with these? They are pretty tough. Okay, so some of these might be a little bit challenging things, but give them your best shot. I do think it's harder from the supplier side to understand than it is from the demand side. Now, where all of this is leading to. Next week, we're going to have these different graphs where we'll look at supply and demand. Now, we could look at this and say, oh, yeah, I know how to read this. At a price of $5, that means they're going to sell 8 of whatever this good is, the burritos that I've got up there. So $5, you'll get rid of 8 burritos, right? Easy enough. But what happens if the demand shifts here? Well, if there was some change in consumer tastes and all of a sudden people go, man, I love burritos way more than cheeseburgers, that would signify the change in tastes of those consumers would signify an increase in demand. So I would need to draw a whole new demand line. And since it's an increase, I'm going to draw it to the right of my existing demand line, note parallel to, and I'm going to put D1. And based upon that change in consumer tastes, what has happened is the price has now increased for burritos. Going price used to be $5. Now the going price is way up here at $9. Now, where people get confused sometimes, when price goes up, we go, oh, well, if prices go up, people won't buy as many. But due to this change in consumer expectations, the shift in demand, not only did the price go up, but so too did the number of burritos that they bought. So hopefully this all makes sense. If you have any questions, please be sure that you ask, and I will be happy to break them down for you. I really appreciate all the time you guys are putting into this. All right, I'll see you back in class soon.